Okay, so hello again and good morning to everyone. I hope everyone has been enjoying the symposium so far. And just a couple quick reminders before we get started with our keynote. As a reminder, just please stay muted to cut down on background noise. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. And if you need any captioning, there is a button at the bottom of your screen and you can click show subtitles. And then just a reminder as well, the SEDLS Discord server is available for attendees to communicate with each other. And we also have that shared notes document that you're welcome to join in on. And both of those links will be in the chat for everyone. So thank you again for joining us today for our keynote. Like we've been saying, this is our first one ever for SEDLS, and we're really excited about it. AI has and continues to change librarianship and how we view information. So I'm really excited today to introduce Dr. Nina Exner. Dr. Exner is the research data librarian at the Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. They both serve the medical, and they both serve both the medical and non-medical campuses of the VCU. Nina advocates for data as closed as it needs to be and as open as it can be. So they work very closely with the national research development community, helping grant writers and faculty development professionals incorporate library services into their research enterprises. In addition, Nina has occupied national service roles in the NIH Data Management and Sharing Plan implementation period. And these roles have included being the inaugural NNLM National Center for Data Services Ambassador and co-chairing the DMP Tool Working Group on the NIH DMSP plan. So they have spoken to librarians, medical faculty, academic computing, and research leadership audiences about the value in interprofessional collaboration and its benefits to the wider academic research enterprise. So thank you so much for being part of SEDLS this year, and I'm going to turn it over to Nina.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank all of you. This is 71, Zoom tells me, of my favorite and closest collaborators, either now or future collaborators. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my slides and hear me?
Yep, you're good.
We see you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So thank you all for inviting me, allowing me to come and speak some big picture talks. As you heard from Katie, I really typically, when you hear me talk, it's about like policy and grantsmanship stuff. And that kind of stuff is going to come up in this because I just can't resist it. But I do want to try to move forward a little bit. So, and if you need a read along or alt text enriched copy of the slides, there's a link in the note-taking document too. So a million moons ago, before the graphical web existed, we had these things called bumper stickers, which you're familiar with, of course, but we used a lot more bumper stickers when we couldn't have GIFs and memes. And one that has stuck with me, it became very popular, like a dozen cars a day in the region that I was in had this very dated looking now bumper sticker. Where are we going? And why are we in this handbasket? And so whenever I wonder where I'm going and think, am I going to heck in a handbasket? This comes back to me. And so it reappears periodically in my brain like so much life detritus does. And that's why the name of this session. And part of that is like, what the heck? The constant, we're coming up on Thanksgiving, the constant question of what the heck does it even mean to be a data librarian? Who thought that this was a good idea to put these things together anyway? And usually when people ask me for what is a data librarian, why is a data librarian, we wear many hats, and typically I wear my cynic hat when people ask me that. That's where the handbasket part comes in. It's just a lot of, we're just taking data over on everything and going to heck with it. But we do wear many hats. And actually, have a very optimistic hat that I don't always let shine. And so today I want to say that actually data librarians, and as mentioned already, I talk to a lot of like grant people who are deeply in grant research. I'm seeing data librarianship everywhere. Like once you get out of, I know we see data everywhere in libraries recently too, but once you get out of libraries, there's a lot of discussion about libraries and the adjacency of libraries to data across disciplines and saying like, you've got to talk to your library about this stuff. It's really cool and sometimes a little intimidating. Let me give you a couple of examples. Because this is grants and grants related stuff, they're going to lean towards the science side of things. The National Academy of Medicine, National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, the National Academies Open Science Roundtable has had a heck of a lot of library engagement. Probably the most recent interesting output from the Open Science Roundtable is this, the developing a toolkit, which talks about a lot of library related and library underpinned tools. But there's a lot of other outputs from those open science guys too. In addition, we've seen reproducibility and replicability all over the place. And this is a report, again, from National Academy of Science. University libraries are developing a more comprehensive role to aid researchers in the curation of digital artifacts, particularly research data, and they will increasingly participate in reproducibility initiatives. So that's what the National Academies said. I'd actually argue that libraries aren't developing curation and digital artifacts. Like, we've led that already, but increasingly now the research data people are saying, whoa, that's really cool. In a much more policy wonk side of things, a group called the Council on Government Oh, I just forgot what the R stood for. Maybe one of you will remember. COGR, Government Relations, that's it, which is professionals who work between universities and federal agencies. So they advise your grants office and your provost and president or chancellor's office. And when they were talking about the NIH's data management and sharing stuff and the roles and responsibilities considerations on campuses, they said, the first thing you need to do is discuss this. This was back before the NIH implementation rocked in this year. You need to discuss this to be prepared with your senior leadership. And when we say senior leadership, we mean operations, library, IT, faculty, etc. So we were right up there with the big operations and IT and oh yeah, also the faculty groups as well. So that highlighting of the library on the short lists of people to talk to about data sharing has really grown and is really kind of cool. Another thing from these government relations folks was their survey on trying to project the costs and burdens of complying. And in their large institution survey results, trying to predict the future, so who knows how accurate this is, but they put the library, their data, I should say, put the library as second, right behind the faculty researchers themselves in where the burden of the data planning process is hitting, and then continuing to be really important at these big institutions with over $100 million a year in research grants funding. Continued to put the library on the short list of people being hit with this burden through the storage and integrity stages of things. What I think is more interesting is that their cohort of what they call smaller institutions, what I would call like medium large institutions, because if you're getting a whole lot of grants, you're not small, but this more much more complicated and more parties in the pie. of what is it going to cost for medium institutions to comply. We see libraries equal or above everyone but the researchers themselves, more than IT, more than the grants office, which is that first line that says pre-award proposal development. That means grants office or Office of Research, Division of Research, whatever you call them, the grant people on your campus. Throughout this process. So this shows that we're really seeing libraries affecting and visible in the process. And thank you, Marla, for linking Koger. There's a lot of stuff that you don't have to be a Koger member campus for on their site. That's pretty cool. So people are saying like those library guys, and that's not really surprising because we're pretty freaking awesome. But I will admit that I'm a little surprised that people are seeing it and saying it in these big national policy documents all over the place. So what is it that's so awesome about us? Because I know some of you are not. Well, someone made me that hat icon. Oh, no, I'm letting myself get distracted by the chat. I'm sorry. Someone made me that hat icon and I had to steal it for data from DataCure. If you're not in DataCure, it's a really cool board and community for library, for data and data adjacent folks. So what is it that's awesome? Why are we so awesome? I mean, we're just cool people, of course, but you know, what is it that's attracting this attention? So let me talk about the data lifecycle because it's obligatory. Someone has to talk about a data lifecycle because it's a data library symposium, right? So I'm checking that box. Oh, it's a real symposium because we've talked about a data lifecycle. But since I come from a science background originally, I also want to link it to the scientific method because the data lifecycle is just like scientific method in old school words before the graphical web, before the first human genome was sequenced. Old hat, many hats, old hat. The data lifecycle just mirrors what the science side of things and social science empiricists tend to think of as how research works. So in the scientific method, somewhere between stuff we observe and questions we ask about the world leads us to formalize a question, select or collect data, do an analysis, interpret and disseminate and discuss with other scientists our findings, which then inspires new observations and then more questions get happening. And this is really on a sort of a individual, but also community-wide basis. We've adapted this to the data lifecycle to say that shared data inspires questions that either emerge from, or people say, oh, finally, I can answer this question, and they explore in the shared data, they select some of the shared data, or they combine it with existing data, analyze it, interpret and discuss findings, and then disseminate their data. That's like the way that the data lifecycle is supposed to work. Now, it's easy-ish to draw a life cycle. I ain't saying I could do it because I'm not a data visualization professional, but I bet there's some people with excellent design skills, not it, that could probably draw an excellent life cycle. And here are some that I've used. Part of the ish part here is you can see that each of them's a little different. But I've used all of these because they're all really good perspectives and tell us different things. Compared to the relative ease of drawing a life cycle, though, making data actually be a cycle is bleeping hard. And all of you have been in different parts of that, or have perhaps been curious about different parts of that as you try to help your patrons, or you try to learn how to help your patrons and face the challenges your patrons face alongside them. To either find the data that was shared or make the data be shared, it's freaking hard. Because curation, digital curation adapted to the data environment to be data curation, is essential to close that. You can toss a random spreadsheet out there, but it's not going to actually close that cycle without both the curation and the discovery stages of information. And that's complex expert work that a bazillion people are sitting around talking, not sitting around, are scratching their heads, working really hard and talking and collaborating about trying to figure out how to curate and improve on the expertise involved in curation. And a lot of the best people doing that are data and data adjacent library folks. As parts of that process, data management planning, including the DMP reference interview, or DMSP now, reference interview, where we try to take a faculty member and say, friend, I know you want to tell me about your protein pathways, and I know you want to tell me about the validity and reliability of your social sciences data collection instruments. I know you want to do all of that, but if you want to write this DMP, I need you to focus a little bit and tell me whether there's any standards that you've ever heard of defining the metadata in your field. And that's hard. It's not falling off the log, but it's not falling off a log, although my words are, but we're busy doing that. And we've been told by the funders that we need to do that important, complicated work, because saying, oh, I wish I'd shared that data a little bit differently. If I'd thought about sharing that data, I might have kept some notes throughout. Just isn't as good as, hey, I planned ahead and took those notes. I documented my variables, both my code variables and my data collection instrument variables. I documented them both. Planning ahead is really important for getting that stuff to work. And so those of you who are either supporting or struggling with DMPs and DMSPs, you're doing the work of getting the faculty to step forward a little bit on this road. I am going all over the place. Come on, keys. Okay, thank you. At the other end of the spectrum, or the very next step in the data lifecycle, but somehow these are never the same people for me, and they may not be for you either. Data search and discovery, trying to find, identify, and interpret what those shared data sets are in order for another researcher to try to make use of and harness that, is also important expert work that requires some really long, in-depth consultations. And remember when we thought that AI was going to fix that? Google released a data set search. They're going to fix this whole discoverability issue, and we'll just be able to Google, like, find me the data set that'll answer my question. We briefly thought that was going to fix the problems. I do occasionally use Google dataset search, especially when University of Michigan, sorry if any UMich folks are here to be traumatized by this, University of Michigan takes down ICPSR and ISR because someone tries to hack their servers. But generally I do try hitting that, but it doesn't like change the data discovery experience for me, and I imagine it probably doesn't for you either, but maybe I'm wrong. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening. Planning, description. I didn't get too deeply into description, but descriptive metadata, I'm going to try to touch on that too a little bit, but I'll admit that I'm not a cataloger, but I do understand the really important part of interoperable, and you're actually going to hear a little bit about description more broadly as I go. Documentation, because we don't understand variable 1 and variable 2 without having some documentation. Those geniuses in digital preservation, and those of you that run repositories, thank you very much. The data visualization and communication and dissemination folks who help us to make sense in an interpretation way, and the discovery folks who help with data reference and data set search, all of that is the work of making open science something more than just piles, metaphoric digital piles of data scattered on the floor. If you remember, if you're as old as I am, you'll remember that the internet is a library where all the books have been dumped on the floor. So we're still in a lot of ways at that stage with data sharing, and it's only us and our colleagues that are thinking about this as a description, documentation, and information process. It's not only us, I lie, but the deep thought that we've put and are putting into these things, the presentations that we've seen are all parts of this meaning-making cycle. That's instrumental to these solutions that the big head thinkers at the federal funding agencies and at the big professional association like the National Academies are looking at. So we are not researchers ourselves, but data and data adjacent librarians are helping to create research meaning so that the research is meaning something to our consumers, our patrons, the next generation of researchers. But it needs a lot of work, and it's evolving constantly because data is complicated in slightly different ways than other information is complicated. The complicatedness of data throws a thrilling curveball at us compared to other information. That said, data is everywhere. The whole idea of data has gotten super mushy. It's not quantitative, it's not qualitative, it's everywhere. Everything is data as we transition into the AI age. And we already started seeing that with big data as high velocity, highly variable types of data. That is to say, lots of different types of stuff squishing together into a big lake of both metaphorically and that's technologically what we call it, a big lake of stuff. So everything at that point becomes data. And data is the new oil, a metaphor that came out of the business and economics perspectives, practitioner perspectives. I put the question mark at the end for myself because this could mean a lot of different things. So data has been said to be potentially the new oil in that it is profitable, highly profitable. Companies that find ways to make data interpretable, analyzable, they use that analytics to make a huge, not a small edge, but a huge edge over competitors with similar products in some cases, but less effective use of analytics. But it requires expertise and technology like oil. This was the original point of the data is the new oil statement. It requires a lot of expertise and technology to extract. You don't just like shove a shovel into the ground and oil bubbles up and boom, oil, profit, money. It's not like that for oil, and it's not like that for data. It requires some specific expertise, a lot of advanced and particular technologies, and a lot of work to extract and turn it into that profit. And this part was not part of the original data is the new oil statement, but when I hear data is the new oil, I have quite mixed emotions on it because oil is also an easily unjust profit machine. I'm not arguing it's not profitable, but it can be also unjust. And so the metaphor is apt in ways the original metaphor maker didn't mean it to be, because oil has complex and disparate impacts And both in nations and regions with where there is oil economics, oil-driven economics happening, and in all of our work to understand data-driven economics, there are highly disparate impacts that should be considered and thought through very carefully. And librarians do a lot of that work too, because we've been thinking about disparate impacts of stuff, of information and knowledge and objects for a long time. Wow, again, with the double, too much coffee. So it's important to think about what libraries always think about as information and data. But data and the information landscape are co-evolving. They're getting closer together. The edges have been blurry for a long time, maybe forever, I don't know, but certainly for a long time. But increasingly, we're seeing data and information converge as analytics and artificial intelligence and visualization and communication and other skills and meaning making and understanding making and interpretation try to come together. Our data visualization experts are seriously working on trying to do that. And you're instrumental in keeping that. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. To keep that information thought process, you can hear a little more about that in a minute, together as the technologists continue to try to push data and information and knowledge and wisdom and the whole information impact cycle together. So as we think about these landscapes evolving together, though, what does that mean to say that? And if you say they're coming together, what even is data currently? Because increasingly, every kind of stuff is going into data models. We're seeing text, vast amounts of text going into AI models and becoming the data that then drives interpretation. We're also seeing all kinds of other stuff mushed up into the same lakes, and then things that are more complicated depending on who you ask what the term is, but things that are even more complicated than lakes in the AI world. We're getting images, we're getting geospatial data, we're getting people moving around, so not just any geospatial but personal pathways. We're getting videos and behaviors, surveys that are deliberately taken, surveys that are not deliberately taken as they track our information through our digital pathways. So the line between data and information is blurred, and current technology trends, I should say recent, but especially this year, we've seen more blatantly the trends of separation between data and information have been really it's been more of a converging trend, and the line between these is blurred, maybe non-existent. It's become such a huge overlap. But we, as librarians, already think about information and data through information and data literacy. And I want to shout out to my health sciences and medlibs colleagues. The academic and academic medical communities library communities are actually quite different in a lot of ways. So there's this thing called critical appraisal that health sciences and medical librarians do that is freaking awesome. And a little bit of a different perspective on analyzing information content than information literacy. Both perspectives, though, are things that the discipline already thinks about, that even if you're currently a student, all the way through if you're older than me in the profession, which there probably are not many people here that are, all of that all of that evolution of from before information literacy, which is comparatively new as a perspective, and data literacy, a somewhat newer perspective, all of that thinking that libraries have put in really applies to how are we going to think about information and data as these lines are blurred together. That is really going to be key, already is key, honestly, which is why we're starting to get all of these huge, like, make sure your library is in the mix. Short list of who the resources are in open science, in reproducible science, even if the science can't be open, because not all science needs to be open. There's still privacy and ethics and laws and all kinds of stuff, but it can be more reproducible. And the whole future of research and technology data integration. I mean, what is integration? Who cares about data integration? Well, let's think for a minute. For those of you who have thought about the FAIR or findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable framework for which actually kind of started with a humanities perspective, but rapidly got sucked into data sharing. Let's think about that interoperable, that is the hardest I ever to exist. Interoperability is the nut that is hard to crack. It's even hard to explain, honestly, what interoperability is. But when we have trouble and challenges with harmonizing up to some big repository, or we have search difficulties where we can't get all of the finding to happen. I mean, even subject headings are fundamentally an interoperability solution so that we can figure out, hey, what are the best access points to this Keynote where some bozo decided that they were just going to call it, where are we going and why are we in this handbasket? Instead of actually putting a meaningful keyword searchable title on it, they decided to be kitschy and cute and thought that that was funny, which might have been pretty funny at the time, but it's really hard as a data search or information search problem. So we've been thinking about interoperability and description for ages now as a profession. And now, honestly, everyone, although everyone doesn't know it, is thinking about interoperability in a larger way. Because there's this thing called a foundation model or transformer model that's emerging, has emerged, actually, I should say, where we take all different kinds of data. In a foundation model, we just take everything, like all the text that we can possibly get, and lots of images, and speech, and structured data as well, because that's actually really important to getting things to work. But also other stuff like 3D signals, like where is my follow my iPhone going, and all of those kinds of things. And we put them together, and then we pre-train them using some of that structured data, but also some other things like deliberate human interaction training, and also some really sort of feeds its own self, comes out of the model, and then goes back into the model to train it, which is getting a little weird there. That's where I'm worried about the Skynet kinds of things happening. And then we build a foundation model, and that foundation model then can be adapted to many different tasks: answering questions, analyzing sentiments, captioning images, running my subtitles right as I'm babbling along, all different kinds of things. So you probably didn't expect to have to deal with an IT / machine learning thing today, but I'll try not to make any more big IT statements. But what is the context that we have had this foundation model thing coming up in? Guess in your mind. And my hint is that this is also called a generative pre-trained transformer, which you can either intuit from the generative part or the GPT initials of that this is a very important driver. The GPT is the GPT and Chat GPT, of course, an important driver of this whole Gen AI shift that we're seeing a lot. So, but garbage in and garbage out is still a fundamental concept until, Skynet, I don't know. But garbage in and garbage out really is still a fundamental issue with computers. They're only artificially intelligent, not truly self-governing. The training isn't quite the same as learning. And then garbage in and garbage out sounds like a thing like, you're putting a bunch of crap in there and you're just going to get garbage out. Obviously, though, saying like all the AI stuff is just garbage is not meaningful. And that's not really what I mean anyway. Because garbage, like a lot of information concepts, is contextual, also constructed. So more generally, when we think about the stuff in AI, it's better to say that what goes in comes out. What goes in with that data, and you saw that it was a lot of different stuff, will come out of that model when we transform it into lots of different adaptations for different purposes. I got really lucky in that this article came out recently. Last week, I think. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago now. What even is time? I don't know. That if you ask questions, medical questions about things that have been proven not to be accurate because they were based on assumptions about the relationship between race and biology that have been disproven since we've had a much more nuanced understanding of genetics now. Pardon me. That these disproven concepts, if you ask about them, will come out of the large learning models. If you ask an outdated medical topic from the model, it'll give you the old, outdated, no one has figured out that this is not a thing anymore concept. So if you have like, is this a real thing or is it not a real thing? And you ask a question about the not real thing, but that we used to think was real, and race-based medicine is their specific example, it'll just spit out the answer of like, what would people have answered in the 1950s or the 1980s, or the 1880s if that went in. So this is because we put in a lot of stuff, because when it says large language models, like the large means it needs to be really large. So it's not that it's not a blanket statement that we can say like the medical knowledge, as it were, medical texts that are in there are wrong. It's that the medical texts that are in there are everything. And if you ask about a thing that is wrong, it will give you the wrong thing's answer, because the wrong and the right are both in there. Everything is in there. There's no simple answers to how to fix this, though, because AI, which is already, I mean, we were using AI before this year. Gen AI is just a trendy new concept, but the stuff that like, will you be adding AI to this? AI was already everywhere, but AI, whether it's the AI we want or the hallucinations that we say, hey, AI might be a little crazy, like all the AI is together needing a lot of data, all the data. And so to build the good AI or the bad AI, we need to throw in all the data that we can find. And because we're working with text, so this data is now textual data. One of the ways that these models get built and trained is by putting in expert classification. So a way to do this is to put all the books that they can get their hands on in, and they're cataloging in publication, or CIP, or all of the LOC assigned, Library of Congress assigned classification sections. You put those in because those are the expert judgments about what does this book mean? What is the topic of this book? And you need lots of text to build the cool things AI is doing, which I don't want to throw under the bus. None of us do. It's not realistic. This stuff has been solving problems for us and creating problems for us. But for those of you that think about classification and description and metadata, if you put all of the cataloging and publication that was assigned at the time the book came out, and the Library of Congress classifications that were assigned when the book came out, we already know from the complicated conversations that our cataloging segment, our description and metadata segment of our profession have been talking about, that this stuff needs a lot of remediation and just evolution, because things change, classifications change, and classifications need to change. But we're not putting the changed or remediated classifications in. The classifications that were attached to the book when it was published are what goes in, without all the expertise and knowledge that has been put into the system since. So it's predictable, it's assumable that there's going to be a problem. We have already, as a profession, identified that there's going to be a problem, but the shortcuts that are taken in building these models and pre-training these models depend on things that have circumvented all of the discussion that we've had since to improve the system of description. Now, I stopped watching the chat because that's I'll come back to the chat because otherwise I'll get distracted and off on tangents, as a lot of you know from the way I usually am. But my faculty would say, well, you need the numbers. The numbers are going to be more neutral. Quantitative data is going to be more neutral than that squishy word-based nonsense. I would say that is not true. And a very broad concept that you might want to keep in mind is that machine learning and AI, basically, machine learning is the stuff that is the broader classification of analytic approaches that underlie AI, and that's in a really broad, unnuanced brush. But typically, somewhere in the computing process, one of two things has to be happening: either prediction or classification. There's almost always only prediction or classification somewhere in the guts of the computer logic. So is prediction or classification, or both, through quantitative data going to be more neutral? Well, we have a great model that already existed before AI, but the concepts of numeric prediction classification haven't changed since this. We've just done it bigger and faster. In redlining, which I'm sure that many of you have heard of before, we did predictive classification. And in a very, very loose summary that some historians should actually give properly, it was intended to quantitatively predict neighborhoods' hazardousness to loan mortgages to. And they put in past quantitative data on things like income, approval, denial of mortgages, mortgage, that should be of mortgages, not or mortgages, mortgage success and failure, other quantitative numbering measures. But what happened is they ended up creating maps that almost spot for spot predict the high percentages of Black would-be mortgage borrowers. And there's three concerns that come up that I want you to consider as you think about how your humanities knowledge and your information knowledge, if you have any, I don't, your information knowledge, which we all have, and other stuff can go into understanding the concept of concerns and literacy and ethical thought in the AI era, because it's based on prediction and classification. So first, try to step back a little bit from your gut reaction to redlining and think, how did the existing data on approvals of mortgages and incomes affect the model? How and why did that data bring in something that turned out to be identical to the racial lines? Second, I'm going to tell you about the concept of proxy variables, which is a very important, I think, idea to have in mind. So that's the one sort of techie statsy thing that I might throw at you today. I apologize for that. And then in the more like philosophy of the future, thinking about the history of what happens when these maps are sent to loan officers, and those loan officers are told, if you want to keep your job, here's the data. It's neutral, it's numbers-based data about mortgage risk. All right, so past data affects new models. Assumptions in existing data come into the model we build in the same way today. And when I say models, I include research models and AI models. The whole underpinning of generative AI and other emerging and also established AI approaches is to expand the types of data that go into the foundation model in order to be adapted into all of these different useful uses. And don't ask whether there are assumptions in the data, because there are always assumptions in the data. There always are assumptions in the data. What you really want to ask is, what are those assumptions? And how will those assumptions affect the questions or prompts that can be asked of your AI model? Related to this is the idea of proxy variables, which actually emerge in the training part. Past lending and past defaults are used to approximate or proxy desirable future lending. But it turns out that they also accidentally, or maybe on purpose, I wasn't there. That's before my time. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Turns out that they also proxy race really well. Sometimes proxy variables are a desirable, useful thing as a way to try to measure a thing that we can't measure, like happiness. You can't really measure happiness. But they also embed assumptions, such as we put in a variable that says, did we lend to them before? Was it approved or denied? But in that process, before the law said you can't use race to approve or deny, but we've put in the approvals and denials from that point of view. So ask what the assumptions are is what assumptions were in those approvals and denials that they stuck into the model. And then the proxy variable, how will that affect the questions we ask? So I'm going to give you a real example here, briefly-ish, of research that I'm doing right now on non-binary genders. I've done the research. It's the write-up that we're having a delay in. So we're studying how do the people with non-binary genders, that is to say, gender identity that is not fully or solely male or female, how do we react when someone categorizes us in AI-driven profiles? You have been profiled by AI. If you exist on the internet, you have been profiled by AI, whether visibly or invisibly. So what assumptions are in these profiles? Pretty much every data, anything, any kind of data collection that collects any kind of demographics or really behavior or tries to figure out who you are is going to collect some kind of data on sex and or gender. And honestly, when it's gender-oriented, people trying to study gender, they're pretty likely to try at least to represent the non-binary community. But the things that are not at all gender-oriented, like engineering, usability, and ergonomics studies, for example, the farther it is from actually being a gender study, the more likely it is to just be like male, female as a proxy variable. So there are always assumptions in the data, or almost always, because everything that collects any kind of user info tries to collect, oh, another typo. Dang, I thought I got all of those. Tries to collect sex and or gender and embeds that in the data. The assumption that you must identify as male or female, or some of the survey people, the government now tells us you can be male, female, or transgender. Now, I just want to briefly say that male, female, transgender is neither exhaustive nor exclusive as a categorization for the trans non-binary community. It's just stupid in like obvious logical ways to have these be the three, choose from these three categories. Maybe male, female, other? What we asked, we got these answers. We got people just suggest all the possibilities, and these are all the categories that got some votes. But we had over 100 participants, so none won entirely. But tied for first is either add non-binary as a third option at minimum, or none, no gender at all. Stop collecting gender because collecting any gender embeds some kind of assumption that won't represent someone. And how does that affect other categories? We asked, other than the assumption that whichever gender identity was put into your profile, when you look at your profile, whichever way it classified you, other than that, when you look at your profile, how well represented do you feel? And most people put in the middle, and the next close to next most is the slightly. So we have a heavy skew here to the nope. This profile, even ignoring whether it classified me as male or female, does not represent me. So there's not an easy answer to that. It turns out it's more complicated than seeing just add a third or fourth or 100th option, because so many of the answers to the open-ended options just turned around and said, why did you even need to put this variable in anyway? So when we think about putting all of the stuff into AI, like maybe all of the stuff wasn't the right approach. And by putting everything into one giant bucket, you're not doing what you should be doing. What you should be doing is using my interests to predict my profile interests. This is online user profiles, instead of trying to use my identity. So stop trying to use gender as a proxy variable. Because you can always assume for the non-binary population that the gender data is not going to represent and categorize correctly. It doesn't matter what you do, it's probably not going to work for everyone. So as long as that data is involved in any way, there's probably inaccuracy in the assumption that gender can be represented in 2 or maybe 3 or maybe 4 categories. So the question then becomes, if the gender is guaranteed to be wrong for some of the population, so we know we're going to have incorrect data, what is the effect of having incorrect data when this model is used? And that's going to depend on the use and the context. There's not a straightforward answer of like, yes, do this, or no, do that. When we take it back to the broader population, this is a cycle. Data and AI are effectively synonymous, or maybe just very tightly tied cycle. So we're going to use that data anyway. So what happens when loan officers are say, you know, if you don't want to use these redlining maps, we'll just fire you and use someone else. Likewise, a student is going to use AI. to write a better essay. They're just trying to get their essay written. So when we put data in that is about how do you predict good text, because that's what ChatGPT, for example, is supposed to do, how to write good text. But we're not really using a model that's made to write accurate facts. And so what happens when facts into essays happen as part of trying to build a factual essay from a model that is presenting or proxying good sentences as factual sentences? All right, so this information, or really in this case, this data, but actually the information creation, the data creation had a process. This might start sounding familiar again. And the authority of the data and the information and the output and the entire process, that authority is constructed and contextual. I could keep going through more frames, but I think you get the idea of the information literacy frames, unless you're old like me and you can't remember all of the frames. So librarians who can also think about data stuff are key to helping people think through these issues. So we're already doing cool stuff for the grants people. And I think that the data information intersection is going to make us key to thinking about AI. So where are we going as a profession? I don't know. You've heard a lot of just random stuff that I think. But wherever it is going, it's going to be somewhere awesome. And I'm pretty sure we're not actually going to heck in a handbasket. Although I did want to briefly mention, as my timer goes off, that when I was trying to write my alt text, I was like, hey, this is an easy one. I just need something to tell me what the captions were that I put in this image. And the caption it gave me was a graph with purple rectangular bars. That was the AI description. It's not wrong. It is indeed a graph with purple rectangular bars, but is it right? I think this is a good example of where the data process may have brought in some assumptions that are not actually what the user would need to know. Thank you so much for your time. I'm always happy to chat with you, especially if you want someone to talk about NIH and grant policies, because I can do that in my sleep.
Thank you so much, Dr. Exner. I love that you talked about like the AI profiles, because it always makes me very self-conscious of like, what Amazon AI profile am I under? But it is something that's very, very worth thinking about and considering, especially as you're online. And I'll give people a second to maybe type some questions in the chat if there are any. We did get one earlier. Someone mentioned that I have undergraduates who are excited about AI, but I found it hard to share these considerations, some of the unjust ones, in a thoughtful way, which takes time, and there's limited interactions with students who are only hearing positive messaging about AI. Do you have any tips for this person?
So my top tip is don't start with AI is bad, because that's a message that people hear from the teachers and everyone. You know, when Wikipedia came out, old hat again, we got a lot of don't use just blanket, don't use Wikipedia in your papers. Before that, we actually had previously gotten a lot of just don't use encyclopedias in your papers. That may be some professors' solutions, and a lot of journals have gone that way, but I think talking about some of the strengths, and then what are some of the weird things, some of the hallucinations or just peculiarities that people have seen or heard about, as a case study discussion starter, I think is a good one. I have been using the ban from Stack Overflow, and why Stack Overflow said that people couldn't use generative AI posts to answer their questions, because I like the phrasing that they use. This is more of a like talking to data science, maybe not freshman, sophomore. I like the phrasing they use, that the problem is they're so convincingly wrong. They sound so good, even though they're incorrect. as a starter, but I think making some sort of mini examples out of the hallucinations news, and then having people discuss it, and then discuss other places that they or their friends have had ChatGPT or other tools do funny but weird things, and then maybe circling back around to data literacy. What are some of the like skews that are built into the data, and can they guess some of the problems? But it's tough, and also everything is changing really fast. Yeah.
Thank you again so much. A couple people have dropped some other resources in the chat too around this topic. But I want to thank you for taking the time for speaking with us today. And we're actually going to break for the day. So for those of you that signed up for the workshop after this, the logistic regression and stata, that starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. So please check your emails for the Zoom link for that workshop. And we will resume tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. And the first session of the day is going to be from beginner to practitioner, building confidence in coding through an R community of practice. So thank you again, Dr. Exner, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.